If you want to make changes, you've got to be proactive. You've got to make some plans, make sometimes some tricky choices, because there's often no easy choices, because if it was easy, you'd have worked out already. And sometimes there's a payoff to be made, for example, between hours and money worked. And that takes a bit of being proactive, sometimes a bit of courage. It's not always easy. I think you just need to acknowledge it is a little bit unsettling, and just coming back to work and finding things a little bit difficult initially doesn't mean you're right back into burnout. It just means that change is difficult for all of us. It might be a bit stressful, but you're probably going to respond to that pressure and that stress with improved performance. And returning to work is one stage of your career. It's not a permanent situation. So actually that might just be okay.
Have you ever taken more than a few weeks off work, for example, maternity leave, a sabbatical or a career break? If so, you'll know that it's tricky going back to work even after a positive experience, let alone a difficult one like a serious illness, stress or burnout. Working in high-stress, high-stakes jobs can be pressurised at the best of times, but when you're feeling rusty and you've been through the mill mentally and emotionally, it can feel impossible, and your confidence may have taken a serious knock, meaning that imposter syndrome rears its ugly head. But with some careful planning and proactivity, you can make this process as painless as possible and even realise that you're bringing new skills, attitudes and mindsets into your workplace, which may be helpful for everybody. So in this episode, Dr. Katya Miles joins me for the first episode in our series about what to do after burnout to discuss how to go back to work well. We discuss hints and tips which will hopefully set you up to continue to be able to rise to the demands of the job. We also talk about what to say to colleagues and how to avoid slipping back into stress and burnout. While this series is focusing on what to do after burnout, the principles apply to us all, whether we've been off work due to any sort of leave or even just a couple of weeks of holiday. I've been stunned recently by how close to burnout many of my colleagues are right now. And if we can take just some of these principles and use them to prevent burnout, we'll be able to make a big difference. So in the next episode, I'll be sharing the second half of our conversation, which is all about how to plan your working life so that you can ensure that you don't come close to burnout again. So listen to this episode if you want to know why planning your return to work requires more than just checking the newest guidelines. The importance of reintegrating and belonging to your team, and how to make a skills inventory to boost your confidence when you go back to work. Welcome to You Are Not a Frog, the podcast for doctors and busy professionals in healthcare and other high-stress jobs who want to beat burnout and work happier. I'm Dr. Rachel Morris, a former GP, now working as a coach, speaker and specialist in resilience at work. Like frogs in a pan of slowly boiling water, many of us have found that exhaustion and stress are slowly becoming the norm. But you are not a frog. You don't have to choose between burning out or getting out. In this podcast, I'll be talking to friends, colleagues and experts, all who have an interesting take on this, and inviting you to make a deliberate choice about how you will live and work. Are you a leader in health and social care with a busy day job who's worried about the level of stress and burnout in your team and wants to get a resilient, thriving and happy team, but without burning out yourself? I know what it's like to work in an overwhelmed team and be one crisis away from not coping. During my coach training, I came across a set of resilience and productivity principles and tools based on coaching and neuroscience, which I wish I'd known about 20 years ago when I first qualified as a doctor. I've put them together to form the Shapes Toolkit, a program for leaders and their teams who want to feel calmer, beat stress and work happier. We've been teaching the Shapes Toolkit course face-to-face and online to doctors and other healthcare teams around the country, and it's made a huge difference to the way people approach their lives and their work. We wanted to make this training and the Shapes resources available to busy leaders who may not have time to attend a day-long course, but still want to learn how to use the Shapes tools with their teams. So we created the Resilient Team Academy, an online membership which gives busy leaders in healthcare all the training and tools they need to beat burnout themselves and get a happy and thriving team. You'll get webinars, training, mini videos and loads of other resources at your fingertips. You can sign up for the Resilient Team Academy individually or as an organisation. We only open our doors twice a year, So do join while you can. Find out more by clicking on the link in the show notes. It's really great to welcome back on the podcast today, Dr. Katya Miles. Hi, Katya.
Hi there.
It's good to see you. And Katya's a former GP. She's an occupational health specialist. She's also one of our Shapes trainers. She's a career coach and a wellbeing trainer. So doing lots of different things, Katya.
Yeah, I just really love to help people love their work again. And there's quite a few people out there who aren't doing that at the moment. So training, coaching is really something that I'm really passionate about. I'm a trained GP and occupational health doctor as well.
This is one of the episodes in our series about what to do after burnout. So people have been emailing requesting this series, and I'm really grateful to Katya for coming on. And Katya really is a specialist in working well. You are the working well doctor, and also occupational health. And so I thought it'd be really good to pick Katya's brains about how to go back to work. Now, this is obviously about what to do after burnout, but I think a lot of what we talk about is going to apply if you're coming back to work, whatever, whether it's after a maternity leave or whether it's after, a long, complicated illness, whether it's after a period off with stress or burnout. So I think this will be helpful for lots of people. But Katya, first of all, can I ask you what particular issues you notice with people going back to work that are just general issues with anybody, whether they've been off with stress or maternity leave or whatever? Because I know that you were talking about some common threads that you were seeing.
I do a fair few of these workshops, actually, like you said, for different groups, as you described, people from maternity, sickness absence, which might include burnout, or people even on military or academic postings who then come back into medicine. There's a couple of things. I think if you're away for a fair few months, which is normally the position for people like this, there's just that sense of being a bit rusty. And people often use the word imposter syndrome when they sort of describe how they're feeling. That's a very broad term. I know you've done a wonderful previous episode with Sarah Golding about that. But I think there's something about, I think, people feeling like they feel a bit of a fraud. They feel that everybody at work is somehow slick and with it and belonging together, and that sometimes people feel that they're not quite back in that zone. They're not quite belonging. They feel a bit rusty, and they've got other stuff going on usually in their lives because they've just had this time away. So their focus might have shifted slightly as well. So I think those are some of the common themes that crop up for people.
People coming back after a period of stress and burnout, are there any specific issues for them that you don't see in other people?
I'd say confidence probably maybe a little bit lower in some of those people coming back after stress and burnout versus somebody who's been away for some other professional development reason. There's something about stamina as well, and whether it's burnout or having young kids, there's something just about your stamina capacity, stamina level is probably different. And there's something there just about managing yourself and your sustaining yourself that is maybe different. And I think that happens as we grow up. As we all grow older anyway, mechanisms we would have used as junior doctors or as medical students when we basically just smashed through it. You just can't keep that up for the whole of your career. So it's about having slightly different tools in your toolbox.
So sort of confidence, feeling rusty, and stamina and life changes. Those are pretty universal things, actually. So we're not just talking about stress and burnout here. We are talking about coming back after a prolonged time. And yeah, I've definitely noticed I can do a lot less now than I used to be able to do without feeling really, really tired. I'm sure that is my age and time of life. I think often people that do come back, like you said, after maternity, if you've got a baby or 2 babies or 3 babies to look after, people who come back after stress and burnout, you've often got a lot of other stuff going on at home as well, haven't you, which just sort of contributes to the tiredness and the exhaustion that you do feel at work.
I think there's something about stigma as well. I think if you are away for a maternity leave or paternity leave, away for a professional development, that's great. Whereas if you've been away with an illness, especially sort of stress or burnout, some people, and I obviously passionately don't agree with this, otherwise I wouldn't do this job, but some people still feel quite stigmatized or ashamed that they quote, shouldn't have done this, or somehow it was embarrassing or that they ended up having burnout. Obviously, having been through burnout myself, my whole passion is to change that narrative, have these conversations and reduce stigma. But I do think that still exists in professional circles. So I think that might be a differentiator between the groups who are coming back from other reasons and those who are coming back from burnout or stress-related issues.
I think it's really interesting, this thing about stigma. Do you think that because of that stigma that people feel, it makes them approach things differently?
I think there's a couple of things it influences. When people return back to work, if they've been off for essentially sickness absence, with my occupational health hat on, people kind of feel like they don't have anything new to offer the workplace, and that you know, the workplace is is working hard to have them back. So all the team is like working hard to have them back in, especially at the beginning when they're trying to settle back in. It can be hard work for the team. And I think a good team will have an induction period and will try and support people, and that's great. But I think the mindset of the individual returning is different. Often you can feel a bit underconfident, that you're a burden and you have nothing new to add. Whereas I really feel that whenever you've been away, you are a richer person because of the life experiences you've had. And the nature of medicine and most caring professions is all those skills are going to be relevant because you're dealing with people in distress, with patients. So if you've been off and done military service or academic work, of course, there's an obvious thing you're going to be bringing back to work, your clinical work. As a parent, you're going to be bringing back probably time management skills, you know, taking on responsibilities, and obviously you'll have that empathy for other new parents. But if you've been away with sickness absence and burnout, I think you've also got great skills. You've probably got a lot of grit because you're coming back to work. You've probably had to display some courage. And you're going to have empathy for your patients, maybe that you may not have had before you yourself had a period of not being so well. Plenty of patients are stressed. So again, having the ability to relate to that is helpful. You don't have to tell your patient that, but you don't have to tell them your life story necessarily, of course. But just having that experience is going to feed through into how you interact with and relate to your patients.
Yeah, so it's that recognizing that whatever you've been through, that has given you experience, it's given you empathy, it's given you some skills that you might not have learned before. And I definitely remember when coming back from maternity leave, you know, I was really good at advising people about breastfeeding. Didn't know that before.
Yeah.
Like you say, time management, but also those other skills about how to carry on when you're absolutely knackered or when you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I've got nothing left to give here. And I think that is so true. If you've been off with stress and burnout, you've got a lot to offer, firstly in terms of recognizing stress and the impacts on you, and then seeking help and realizing about what consequence it has on your life. So actually there's a wealth of knowledge and experience that I think actually is really vital, not just with your patients, but actually to share with your colleagues as well, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking that as you were saying that, there's obviously lots of teams who are having some pressures. Some people are on burnout or on sick leave, but lots of people aren't. They're just under pressure. But the ability to come into that in place and just have these conversations about stress, about pressure, to be able to identify in yourself or others, and to, again, not have that stigma and just say, I've been through this, I know how it is. And even just small things where you can just have your antennae out. And if somebody seems like they're not doing so well, just have a chat to them, one human to another, really, not necessarily just kind of feeling you have to only do that for people who are directly in your chain of command, but just for the people in your team, just have that human connection. And I think that those skills are very helpful. It does take courage and awareness, but if you have those things, then I think you can be a real asset to a team, actually.
So you've already mentioned that people that come back often feel a bit rusty, their confidence is rock bottom, they've got this sort of imposter syndrome. That I don't really like using the term imposter syndrome, but really that's a blanket term we use for sort of lack of confidence and feeling like you're not quite good enough for your job, and perhaps maybe a bit of unhealthy perfectionism, I have to sort of label it as. What do you advise people to do?
I think it's about being aware, being kind to yourself, being able to just use the words, feeling like I'm underconfident, just being able to say that to your colleagues. So I think that's helpful. But I do think it's always helpful in the real world to have some practical tips as well. So I try and combine the two. I think there's one thing I say to people often is, if you think about the Yerkes-Dodson stress response curve, which you might remember, it just shows how performance responds to pressure. And initially, your performance will improve as pressure increases, as in an exam. You'd hopefully get a peak performance around the exam day just because you're responding to the pressure of the exam. And then obviously if that becomes chronic, then you get potentially longer term health problems and your performance might decline. But I mentioned that to people returning to work and just say, it's a short-term transition coming back to work. And actually, it might be a bit stressful, but if you just think of that response curve, you're probably going to respond to that pressure and that stress with improved performance. And returning to work is one stage of your career. It's not a permanent situation. So actually that might just be okay. You just sort of you get through the exam, then you get through that. Then there's some practical bits just about, do brush up. Guidelines might have changed, especially for people returning during the pandemic or returning to work when the mode of working has changed, thinking of GPs coming back to more virtual work or so forth. Do the brushing up. Use those kit days, those keep in touch days, which some workplaces have. If there are courses, go on them. And use also the opportunity of kit days to keep in touch. So it's not just going and genning up on the facts, though that's helpful. Also just connecting with your team as well, so that you can start to reconnect on a human level, pop in for a cup of tea. Really simple stuff initially. It doesn't have to be massive. So it's just literally going into the building and having a cup of tea and walking out again. That can be enough. And then the next time you go in for longer and you might have a meeting about, the new guidelines or the new situation the team's in or whatever's relevant for your team. There's something about thinking of returning in two ways. One is, how can I reintegrate with this team? So we've talked about the value you can bring and the skills you're bringing, but also it's kind of about saying, okay, where is the team at? I've been away for a bit. Things have moved on. An example might be, well, the pandemic's a great example, isn't it? You left and things are very different. You returned and there might be a vaccination campaign underway, or the software at work might have changed. So there's that piece. Then personalities might have changed. People might have left or returned. So it's about just reconnecting with the people in your team. And you can use this kind of kit days as lots of opportunities. You can call it shadowing if you'd like, which you go in and you sit in with people if that feels appropriate. You might just go and have a meeting where people catch you up on what's going on, or you might just go and sit in on a regular meeting, like a team meeting or an MDT or whatever. All of those are ways for you to get a sense of what's going on, keep your antennae out so you know what the new things are, and then you can identify any gaps. Okay, I'm not familiar with this software. Okay, I'm going to go and spend a bit of time, learning the new software, getting the templates ready so that it's not all going to be a massive rush on day one back at work. Then the flip of that is thinking about you belonging. So it's not just you belonging to the team, but you probably also belong to other groups now. If you're a new parent, you might belong to parent groups. If you are a military, you're going to have connections with those people. And it's also about sustaining all the different support networks you have and just trying to be conscious about that. Lots of people now have WhatsApp groups, or for those trainees returning to work, there's a great organisation called Support with TT in capitals for return to training. So those are GP trainees or other doctor trainees, and I do a fair few workshops for them, and that's a great resource. That's a good example of a network that you could connect with if you're in training as you return to work. And then just real life networks. Is there a junior doctors committee? Is there some other connections in the hospital or in the GP practice that you just want to connect with, so you get that sense of belonging? Because belonging, as we know, is a really important part of being human. Actually, we all know that a sense of not belonging can be perceived as a threat to us as humans. So getting whatever we can in place to just reconnect with the people we're working with and with the groups we'll be working alongside, I think can be really helpful.
I guess if you've gone off with stress or burnouts, probably before you went off, things may well have happened. There may have been some stuff that happened with your colleagues. You may have felt, rightly or wrongly, that you were performing not so well before you went off. Yeah. And you may well be worried about what people think of you when you come back, maybe because of the way things were for you when you just before you left. So I don't know from your experience, Katya, what that was like for you. And I know you've been off with burnout in the past.
Yeah, it was difficult. I remember those feelings, and they're not easy. I think it requires a bit of courage on your part to sort of do some of the things we're doing. They're not always easy to do. It requires a team you're going to kind of be aware, which I think is another wonderful reason to have this conversation on the podcast. Lots of managers are amazing and really aware, and others less so, because it just doesn't always crop up for every person who's managing others. But I think for the team you're moving into, to kind of just be aware of how people feel when they come back, and just small kindnesses. I remember I came back to work and there was some chocolates and wine on my desk on the very first day, and those little things are really lovely. So I think from both sides, I guess it's like any relationship really, whether it's with a friend or anything, a working relationship, how can you nurture that relationship? It's both sides, just being aware that there's been a bit of space and how can we reconnect, and just have that goodwill to reconnect. And on the part of the person coming back to work, sometimes it can feel a bit scary and unsettled. We have to sometimes be brave and get support if we need, and then just be honest about how we're feeling as well. Say to people, I feel a bit unsettled. Would it be okay to have a kit day? Could I come in for a cup of tea before my first day? Is there an MDT you're running that I might sit in on, or a team meeting just so I can get up to speed? All those things are really helpful, and they show willing, from your side. And if your manager is also doing similar things, then that can build the relationship from the side of the management team as well.
It strikes me that all this requires awareness. So it requires perhaps people in your team that you're coming back to know about what's happened. And one of the questions I get asked quite a lot when we're doing the Shapes Toolkit, particularly with managers, is, and when I ask, how should you support people with stress? What would you do when you notice the signs? They're like, well, they're very unsure about what they can tell other people and how much people should know. Now, obviously, it's obviously up to the person who's coming back about how much people know about their condition and what has happened. But in your experience and in your work, how much should people be telling other people about it? Is it helpful just to bare your soul and tell them everything about what's going on so people are mega aware? Or is it that you should actually not tell them too much, just the bare bones? Or is there a sort of happy medium?
I think it really depends on the individual. So it's always, it's obvious, right? If you've had a baby, I think the answer is really whatever the worker who's returning, whatever they're comfortable with. Obviously, if they say they don't want anybody to know, then we have to respect that. But people are going to know you've been off, right? So I think there's something to be aware of, that whatever you choose to say, people know you've been away. They either know you've been away and why, or they know you've been away and it's a blank black box. So
they're going to be trying to fill in the gaps, right?
Yeah, so I think that's something that's helpful for the person returning to think. There is no kind of zero option here. You can't just go back and people just pretend like you've not been away. So you can then choose what to do with that. You can just say to people, I don't want to talk about it. You could say, I don't want to talk about it, but if there's any questions you have, feel free to ask and I'll answer them if I feel comfortable. So there's lots of different ways you could respond as the worker to make it a little bit easier for others. And likewise for the team you're returning to, I think there's an element of, being respectful of people's boundaries, but then you can also have that door open saying, I understand you don't want to say it now, but if at any point you wanted to say, feel free to let me know. It's really just about people feeling comfortable, whatever it takes. It might just be they all need to go out for a karaoke night and that's what your team needs to feel comfortable. And they don't need to know all the details about why you're off sick. Yeah, it really depends on the team and how they function and how you function. I think being aware that it's a thing, you can't pretend there's nothing that's happened.
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, my sort of modus operandi is just to tell everybody everything. I'm quite an open person, which isn't always great, because often it's quite difficult for people to know everything. So I've had to learn to sort of rein it in a bit and not make other people really, really uncomfortable. But I do think some people go the opposite way with their privacy. I can't possibly say anything to anybody. And I think if you're someone who is working with someone who's coming back to work, particularly if they've been off with stress and burnout or maybe another mental health condition, you worry about doing the wrong thing, about saying the wrong thing, about not helping enough. And I would always want people just to say, actually, this is what's happened to me. This is what would be really, really helpful. Can you make a special effort to do this or not to do that? And these are the allowances that I really would like and would be really helpful to me. Because to me, I can't read people's minds and I can't infer from their behaviour or their closed door what they're thinking. And I really struggle when people just assume that, well, you should have known this, or I would just assume that this is how you would act if they haven't been really explicit. So I guess I would always want people to be pretty open and say, look, this is what's happened and this is what I need.
Yeah, it's interesting that. So obviously, if you are off with sickness absence, then it would be great to connect with occupational health, because they're really, really well suited, the best people really to help with exactly this. Work out what the adjustments are that you might need, work with management to work out how realistic that is. If you've got a good relationship with your manager, you can just have that conversation directly often, and you might need input from occupational health as well for their sort of expertise. So I would suggest that if you're coming back from sickness absence and burnout would be part of that, then do please get in touch with occupational health. They're great. I'm not just saying that because of my background. And often GPs have got expertise in that area too. So do make use of that. That's really important. And if it's not for sickness absence, then similar conversations, like you were just saying about allowances, a thing that sprung to my mind when you're talking about that is if you're a mum coming back to work and you're breastfeeding, then you might need to have some space to express some breast milk and a fridge to put it in. And all that just requires conversations, preferably in advance, because everything takes time to plan. And even if you don't want to, like you were just saying, you don't want to tell the whole story, you can even just say that. I'm not comfortable saying this, or I'm not able to say that, but I'd like to share this, or I could tell you that, or do you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and where possible I'll answer them. Just sort of fostering some honesty, even if it's not open. I'm telling you my whole life, but I'm going to be honest about what I can and can't say, and you please be honest about what you do and don't need.
I think it's one thing though to tell your manager this is what I need, but the people who are often most affected are your colleagues. And if you're working alongside them, they may have to do extra work if you're on sort of restricted hours and things like that. And to my mind, it's obviously helpful the manager knowing, but it'd be really helpful your colleagues knowing. You don't have any right to know. But again, it's really hard for people if they don't know.
And again, I think that gets back to the stuff I was saying before about reintegrating and belonging. So where possible, that's where informal relationships are really helpful. And again, people don't have to know everything. They just sometimes just need to know something. And it's a process, isn't it? You might come back to work and feel, I don't want to tell anybody anything, but after a while you might feel more comfortable because you're more settled back in. But yeah, I think where possible, if people know where they stand, it makes things easier.
Katya, when you came back after burning out, when you came back to work, what was your biggest fear?
Gosh, I had lots of worries. I think it was really that, what people would now call imposter syndrome, and feeling you were a bit rusty, those kind of things. I think they're really common, and I remember feeling pretty underconfident.
So imposter syndrome, feeling rusty. And I know that you mentioned earlier when we were chatting that a skills inventory can be quite helpful in terms of getting over some of that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, sometimes I get people to do a little exercise in workshops or in coaching where I just ask them to think about something they've done while they've been away from work. Or it could be anything. Somebody did something about they got some chickens. A project you've done while you've not been in this work. Did you, in this instance, get some chickens? Did you do something new with your kid? Have you done something on your military or academic work? And then just give a brainstorming, like give 2 minutes on the clock or 1 minute on the clock, and literally write down everything you did to get that goal achieved. So, and actually with the example of the chickens, I remember that somebody was like, well, they had to research the chickens, buy the chickens, work out how to look after chickens, build a chicken house, learn how to build a chicken house, source the equipment, source the materials, build that chicken house, get the chickens, feed the chickens. And actually I was okay. So when they step back from that after a very short period of time brainstorming, like, look at all those skills. That's a huge, basically, set of project management skills you've got from your chicken husbandry, and you may not have had those if you hadn't had time away from clinical work. Some people might view it at the weekends around the edges of clinical work. I'm not saying you have to take parental leave to get chickens, but it's just an example of what people can do. And I think being able to then delineate what you've actually done and realize all the different skills that you've had. Another one might be time management. If you've got young kids and you're managing time in a different way because you've now got many more responsibilities you're juggling. I think there's a lot of skills actually we have, and it's helpful to outline them and then realize, okay, how can that apply to work? Time management's an obvious one.
Yeah. Okay. So think about building your confidence, do some stay in touch days, do some brush up, recognize that actually it might feel tricky, but in the short term, we can all cope with stress, and stress can be quite a motivator in the short term to get you to your peak performance, but not if it goes on and on. And then stuff about working out how the team has changed and how you can sort of reintegrate yourself and belong a little bit more in the team that you were in, but also accessing the support networks you might have outside of work and things like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything else that you go through when you do your workshops that's been helpful for people?
One thing that's sometimes helpful is to have people, especially for parental leave, who are at different stages of the, if you want to use the J word, of the journey. And that can be really helpful for people just to share together. So some people might join and they're 6 months away from coming back to work. Others might join and they're 2 weeks away. Or there's a couple of people who have actually just returned to work. And the ability to share with others who are on that journey is really helpful, I think, because it allows you to realise you're not alone and to do a bit of benchmarking. So I think that can be helpful. And I think having a few touch points after your return is helpful, whether it's touch points with your informal support group or with your manager after a little bit back, saying, how is it going, essentially? And an opportunity there to tweak things or get more support or make other adjustments if possible. So it's not just like, let's get to work and then everything stops and it's kind of assumed you're going to roll on. But often it takes a couple of months to get back to a place where you feel that you're kind of fluent again, and just giving yourself time to do that and giving yourself a couple of check-ins along that process is helpful.
So one of the things I think people, particularly when they're coming back with stress and burnout, after stress and burnout, are really worried about is this fear of, well, is this just going to happen again? Am I going to go off with stress and burnout again? And I mean, I always think it's a bit like getting lead poisoning from drinking the water. You might, be living somewhere with dreadful lead pipes. You're giving yourself lead poisoning because you're drinking the water. You go off to the Alps to recover and have, 6 months of no lead. Then you come back and you start drinking the water again. And, you're just going to get sick again. And I think sometimes if you've been off with burnout, you're going back into exactly the same thing. It's pretty likely to happen again. I'm wondering, is that a given or is it not?
Oh, goodness, that's the tricky question. I think, as ever, it's individual, isn't it? So there's lots of things we can do. I do think awareness is really important. So I think even that thing you just outlined about being worried it might happen again, it can become a positive if you reframe that as an awareness. Okay, I'm aware this happened. I'm very motivated for it not to happen again. What can I do? And one thing I would say is do get support the way we've talked about, but also, there is coaching available. I do coaching and courses. I'm actually doing a course about Love Your Return to Work. So I think it's helpful to get resources. So that's one thing. I think there's something about acknowledging that it might be worth planning ahead and planning things a bit differently. Last time the way things were didn't work, and that's why we ended up in burnout. Okay, fine. So what can we do differently now? What can I do as an individual? What can I do within my team? And more broadly, in the longer term, how can I design the work I do? So when I do career coaching with people, that's often what people are thinking about. How am I going to design my career? What's going to work better for me? What can I afford? What's practically possible? So fitting all those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. I think there's also something about acknowledging you've been through a big change. So just acknowledging it is a big transition and you need to give yourself time. I think that's important when people come back to work and they think, I'm finding it difficult immediately. And I think you just need to acknowledge it is a little bit unsettling, and just coming back to work and finding things a little bit difficult initially doesn't mean you're right back into burnout. It just means that change is difficult for all of us and we need to give ourselves time, learn and adapt. And that is a normal experience. I think there's something there about having early warning signs as well. So if you've been through burnout or through stressful periods, you know what that's like. What are your early warning signs? What did you notice about yourself when you were heading into burnout? I often talk about red flags of burnout. So what are the red flags? What are the warning signs? Okay, that's great. It's good to know that. And many healthcare professionals love a red flag. But we're all individuals. So we may not all have a standard list of red flags. So there's something there about being personally aware. So for me, when I was struggling, I cracked my own tooth. Now, cracking your own tooth is not a typical red flag for burnout. But what I didn't do when I cracked my tooth, what I did do was I went to the dentist and got treated and got the little guard that you put in your teeth at night and all of that. I did all that bit, but I didn't do any further reflection. Why was this going on? What's going on to give me so much sort of long-term stress? I've kind of cracked my own tooth. So that awareness was absent for me. But then coming back after burnout, I then had that experience. I had that awareness. So now when I get a tense jaw, I'm like, okay, something's going on here. Let me have a little pause and a reflect and think about what might be causing that stress. So that kind of experience of burnout the first time has actually given you some more insights and more knowledge, and you can use that to support yourself going forward, watch out for early warning signs, and then take action early to prevent yourself getting into burnout. And obviously, I say this in pretty much every workshop, it's okay if you find that you are struggling again. That's okay to not be okay, but just do get early support. And that's the most important thing. There's that thing doctors often do where we don't seek help. We want to be physician heal thyself, or just do a quick corridor consultation with a colleague or a friend, but do allow yourself to be a patient. See your own GP and occupational health if needs be. Practitioner health is a great resource, which I know has been talked about on this podcast before. So just make sure you get support if needs be.
And typically, the people that you've done some career coaching with, what sort of things have they changed that has helped them avoid and prevent burnout?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, again, it's very individual as to what they need, but I think there's some tenets and some common themes. One is this theme about being aware, just having that awareness. The other one is about permission. I don't know about you or about other people listening, but I used to feel very guilty about any of this stuff, even thinking or talking and reflecting on what I might need, because, if doctors and caring professionals were there to look after others, of course, make the care of your patient the first concern is in the Hippocratic Oath. And of course, that's true. But I think it's really important that we also give ourselves permission. Yeah, we also give ourselves permission to look after ourselves as well, not instead of, but as well as the patients. And there's the Declaration of Geneva, the modern Hippocratic Oath, has an addition. The last clause now says, I will attend to my own health, well-being and abilities in order to provide care of the highest standard, or words to that effect. And that, I find that really helpful because it allowed me to give myself permission. And I think that's the other thing that people who I speak to in coaching are thinking about. They've given themselves permission to think about this and to say it's okay to work out what I need along with the patients and maybe other people you might be caring for. Often we have children or other dependents we're caring for. And it's about trying to balance the needs of everybody, including yourself. And I think there's also something about being proactive. If you want to make changes, you've got to be proactive. You've got to make some plans, make sometimes some tricky choices, because there's often no easy choices, because if it was easy, you'd have worked out already. And sometimes there's a payoff to be made, for example, between hours and money worked is one example, or between a flexibility of locum and stability of a salary job might be another example. And work out what fits for you and make those payoffs. And that takes a bit of being proactive, sometimes a bit of courage. And that's really what the coaching and training is for.
Yeah, I'm always reminded of that phrase, if you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always got. And so if you go back into the same workplace with the same mindset, doing the same thing, then probably you're always going to get what you've always got. Now, it's not always possible to reduce your hours, like you said, for financial reasons or recruitment reasons or something like that. But there are other changes that you can make if you can't necessarily change your working patterns. Like you said, the mindset shift of permission, giving yourself permission, learning to embrace the guilt, which is something that we talk about a lot in our Permission to Thrive membership about, if you're feeling guilty, it means you're a good person, right? It means that you can't do everything that you really want to do.
Yeah.
And just recognizing that and going, but that's okay. For me, I think recognizing your limits is a really important thing. My impression of people before an episode of stress and burnout is that they feel that they're superhuman. They feel that they can burn the candle at both ends and do huge amounts of work every week, see all the patients they're asked to see, do absolutely everything, and be pretty high achieving outside of work as well, often running several different things, ignoring their own need for exercise, for sleep, for good nutrition. Then they have a significant burnout, a period of stress, and they realise that they are human. They do have limits. And that's when they start to put the boundaries in of saying, I know I need this sleep. I know I can't go away every weekend. I know that if I have an on-call day, I can't do anything in that evening and I need to get extra help with the family. And they just start cutting things back and simplifying life. I think simplifying is one thing that happens a lot. And they start to put a few buffers in as well. I have a friend who, was very high achieving, high performing, did everything, had a serious episode of burnout, and now she's very boundaried, and she'll say, I can't cope with another night out this week, I'm sorry. She knows that. She knows she needs X amount of nights in to rest and recover so that she can do her job to the best of her ability. And I know in my own life, the thing that makes me feel the most stress is when I'm hurried, I'm rushing, there's no buffers, there's no time in between things. I'm rushing from one thing to another and there's absolutely no downtime. And I think what stress and burnout does for you, the gift, if I can phrase it as a gift, or the lesson, let's say the lesson it gives to you, is that you have to put buffers in and you have to have some downtime and you have to take some time off and some time out and have rest. And often that is actually achievable even in the job that you were doing before. But like you said, you have to be pretty proactive about doing that.
It's funny, actually, I was thinking about that recently. When I was in the olden days, when I was a medical student, I would write a revision timetable and I would always do whatever, however long it was, a week's worth of revision, and I'd put a buffer in at the end. So like the last afternoon would be blank, but you know that by the time you came to that afternoon, it wouldn't be empty, it would be filled with all the stuff you hadn't managed to do before. And I think that just planning that in your daily life is really helpful. And there's something I think you said, actually, which sprung to mind when you were speaking, which is, you know, if you're doing that, then actually being realistic about how long things take. You know, if you've got something to do, estimate how long it's going to take and then double it. And that's probably more realistic as the amount of time it's going to take, whether it's because you get interrupted or there's some extra complexity or whatever the reason. But those things, I think, really do help you be more measured in how you pace yourself, essentially, through your working day, week, year, and balance the fact that the things you do outside of work also hopefully are rewarding, but they're also going to take resources as well. They often take a fair bit of energy, especially if you're looking after others, children or elders or whatever. So yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah, there's a really good book on that, isn't there? And there's one, The Sleep Diplomat, who's got some really interesting TED Talks on the benefits of sleep. And I think, yeah, just sort of realising there's an increasing body of sort of evidence to support some of this stuff. I find that helpful, knowing that there's something that sits behind it rather than just essentially a platitude. So that's something I find helpful.
What's your top 3 tips about returning to work at any point after a prolonged absence? What would your top 3 tips be?
I think the first tip would be to plan ahead. There are lots of reasons we've discussed why to do that, but don't think about returning to work on the Sunday night before you go back on the Monday, but give yourself preferably at least a month or 2. So plan ahead. Communicate where possible, as much or as little as you feel comfortable communicating. And I do think there's something there about just being kind to yourself. It's a normal to find these changes tricky. We've talked about the change curve and so on, but just be kind to yourself. It's normal. Transitions in life are normal, and finding transitions tricky is normal. And it's just a question of getting the pieces in place to support you through it and getting help if things feel tricky.
Brilliant.
Great, that was 4, tips. But anyway.
I think was that 4?
Sorry.
We don't count on this podcast. You're allowed. I think my tips would be, and I loved what you said about, you know, if you're feeling rusty, what can you do to brush up and keep in touch? I would call this staying in your zone of power. So, you know, work out what you're in control of. What could you do? So if you're feeling rusty, if you're feeling underconfident, go and have a cup of tea, go and catch up, go and do a course, go and do something that's going to help, work out what you need, reach out and get it. So that's very much things that you are in control of. If you're feeling isolated from the team, ask someone for a cup of tea, or, you know, bring in a cake or something like that. Yeah. So there's all that stuff that you can do. So that would be my main tip. Brilliant. Katya, if people want to get in touch with you, find out more about your work.
So the best way is to go to workingwelldoctor.com, where you can get links to everything. If you want to join the newsletter, the Thrive Well News, you can just go to the website and click there, or go to my Instagram and click there. I'm on social media at The Working Well Doctor. And then for the Burnout Remedy workshop or small course I'm doing, short course, and the Love Your Return to Work short course, there's registration lists for those. So you can just go to the website or drop me an email. So it's workingwelldoctor.com and theworkingwellexperience@gmail.com. Tell me what you're after and I'll sort it out, or you can go to my website and follow the links.
Great. Thank you so much. And Katya's also one of our Shapes trainers, delivering Shapes Toolkit courses on a Zoom call near you. So
on a Zoom call near you, and sometimes in real life. It's very exciting nowadays. Yeah, it's really fun.
Sometimes in real life, we're back doing face-to-face, so that's nice as well. So yeah, if you'd like us to come do a Shapes Toolkit with you, just get in touch at the email address in the show notes. So thank you, Katya. We'll have you back soon. So that was the first half of our conversation. Tune in next week on episode 128 to hear the rest of our conversation. And this time we talk about how to plan your working life after burnout. We get a lot more philosophical and we think about the importance of working out what you want your working week to look like. This will be relevant to you, whether you have had a burnout or whether you just want to prevent yourself from going into burnout. So we'll see you then. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please share it with your friends and colleagues. Please subscribe to my You Are Not a Frog email list and subscribe to the podcast. And if you have enjoyed it, then please leave me a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. So keep well, everyone. You're doing a great job. You got this.